Welcome on my first step ever. It is always exciting to uncover and discover some journeys which we are not aware of, which we have never heard of, and people we have never seen. But some of them shine so bright that we have either met them somewhere, we have seen them somewhere, we have read about them somewhere, and more than that, we never really come to know what really made them become the person that they are today. Because once they are successful, once they're talked about, once they are invited to talk shows, to events, everything, we can only get to know a bit about them, not really too much. What really went behind building the blocks of the person that they are today is something that we are going to uncover in this chat. Today, we have someone very powerful within, very powerful in her thoughts, very powerful in her spirits. Please join me in welcoming Wendy Alexander all the way from Australia. Hi, Wendy. Welcome on my
Hi,
first step ever.
hi. How are you, Shani?
I'm good and I'm very excited to begin this journey. So, Wendy, thank you so much for doing this today. I would love to give a little sneak peek about you to our listeners today. So,
Okay.
yeah. So, Wendy is an interview and career coach who helps people look so good that hiring managers can't ignore them. Wow. I know each one of you listening to us would want to do that now. I like the term that you make them appear look so good. Amazing. I would like to kind of have that frame of mind when I'm going in a job setting, and that I would like that people have that impression of me. So she was once stuck not knowing how to get out of a financial and emotional mess after a relationship breakup left her broke single mom drowning in debt. But things changed when she changed. She invested in herself, found mentors and a supportive community to turn her mess into her success. And there's been plenty of hiccups along the way. From growing up a woman of a color in apartheid South Africa to being held up at a gunpoint in her first job in Australia. My God. And more than that, her fair share of health challenges, she's beat them all. We have a warrior here. I can definitely say that. And now she runs a company on her terms, helps professional people fearlessly get the job they want, negotiate the income they want, and ultimately the lifestyle that they want. Wow. This is such an amazing peek into your life, you as a person. And I'm glad that we're going to uncover all those things today now. So, Wendy, let's begin. Let's dive into this conversation with you and your story today. Please take us through your early childhood days. Where were you born, and what sort of, society, system, mindset of the people were you surrounded with?
So I was born in Cape Town in South Africa, and I was born in the time in the height of apartheid. So that means the country was segregated, divided by color. So you had white neighborhoods, colored neighborhoods, black neighborhoods. And so I grew up, understanding from quite a young age that things weren't going to be that easy for me and for my family and for my community, because I was classified as colored, meaning I had grandparents who were white and grandparents who were black. So I was a mixed race child. And that means you kind of didn't belong to either. You didn't belong to the black community. They didn't really want to know you, and you didn't belong to the white community either. And then, of course, during apartheid, there was the laws around separation and separate schooling, separate beaches, separate cinemas, everything was separated. And of course, in back then, it was all catered towards the white population. So they got all the highest privileges, the highest access to education and things like that. So I knew from my father instilled in me from a very young age that I would have to work pretty hard to get even iota of success that white compadres would get, put it that way. And so I learned very young that I had to, and also I'm a colored woman. So there's the colored thing against me, and there's the woman thing against me in that world. And so I applied myself, but I also was very disillusioned by what was going on in the country, the separation, the violence. There was a lot of civil unrest. And I became an activist, a political activist at a young age, at probably teenage years. So, I was caught between wanting to do well and also wanting to change things for my people and for the black people in the country. And, so it was like, the angel and the demon on the shoulder pulling me every which way on where to apply my energy. And then we migrated to Australia when I was 20 years old. But prior to that, I'd been through lots of incidents of discrimination. So, put off trains. One time I was probably 15 years old. I was running late for school. So I jumped in the front carriages, which were for whites only, and was then marched and put off the train. So I ended up being late anyway because, um, you know, being put off the train meant I had to wait for the next one, got to school late, was put in detention. And I think at that stage I was quite defiant. So I didn't explain myself. I didn't want to explain myself. I was angry about the way I was treated. And so I just took the detention from the principal, but then spent years, I suppose, angry and seething about all of that discrimination. And so became a political activist. When I did my first year of university, I spent most of my time marching in protest against apartheid. Hardly ever attended lectures, right? I was a rebel.
Good to know.
It was all about trying to create change, trying to be part of change. And I got caught up in a lot of violent encounters, where we were tear gassed and we were whipped and we were shot at, and all of those things happened. Eventually, that lifestyle became too much, especially for my mother, because she was scared. She had 5 kids. I've got 4 siblings. And we were involved in various activities, and my mother was always afraid that something would happen to us, that either we would come home shot or we would end up dead. And so her stress levels went through the roof. And my father eventually decided it was time to leave the country. And my dad's sister had met and married an Australian man. And then his other sister came out a few years later. And so we came out on that family reunion situation with migration. And I came to Australia when I was turning 21. So that was the childhood side of the story. But, there's migration and all of that happened and that I had to get used to.
Now, thank you so much for, taking us through your life in South Africa to begin with. And I would love to kind of uncover your journey as in when up till here, I would say. But just to kind of first, with your time in South Africa, I would say, was nothing close to normal. It's not a normal
No.
life at all. It's
No.
very extreme. I would say, first of all, I'm happy that your family made it through.
Yep.
It sounds very, very, very dangerous
It
to say
was.
so. Yeah. And uh, before we move on to, Australia, your migration journey, and then how did you build yourself? But before that, I wanted to kind of understand, it was such a difficult time for your family and for yourself personally as well while in South Africa. And that was your teenage, while you were growing up over. That's the most
Correct.
troublesome time. And as you mentioned, being a rebel, not caring that I don't want to, explain it to anyone. It's my life, it's my way. Even having those kind of, strong thoughts, how were you still navigating things in your life? If you can maybe take us through that time, because probably your situation was very, very unique. But for our listeners, if they're still in their, teens and their late teens, they are also rebellious for sure. I think rebel for a cause is good. I feel, it's a time that you uncover yourself. If you do not really question things, how are you going to get an answer to kind of really, understand what's happening around you? So how was it for you internally? We have heard about what was happening externally. What was happening internally with you?
So, look, I was always a very curious child, but when I started to realize what the country actually was, I remember feeling like I was this old person in this young person's body. So it was kind of like growing up too quickly. When you see that kind of life and you see that kind of violence, I felt, when I look back now, and even then I felt like I was starting to lose my childhood very quickly, because you have to be alert all the time. You have to look for opportunities all the time. I was never just satisfied with, my parents would sometimes say to me, well, don't ask so many questions because you're going to get into trouble, because it's always like, keep it quiet. Don't be a troublemaker because you could end up in jail and all this kind of things, because that's what happened, Most people who know Nelson Mandela was jailed because he was fighting for freedom of the country. And so my parents were worried about that. And I always felt like I was pulled a few different ways, as I said. The curiosity, because I wanted to understand how to be part of the change to make the country better. But then other times conflicted because I knew I needed to keep my head down, so to speak, so that I could be safe. And then trying to figure out what I was actually going to do with my life as a woman of color in a country that didn't really provide a lot of opportunity. So there was so many things going on in my head, and I was a very serious teenager. I don't feel like I had much of a childhood. I was always questioning. I was always researching, always reading. And I started to write. So that's where the writing side of my life began, because I started to process my emotions through writing. So when I was confused, I would write poetry, or I would write little short stories. I was always journaling, always writing. And that's where the love of writing came from. It was actually trying to process the many emotions, the confused teenage life, through writing. So I have lots of poetry that I wrote during that time, very dark poetry, very angry poetry, because I'm trying to make sense of my world. But that was how I coped. It was internally, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of confusion, and there was a lot of trying to make sense of life as a teenager.
Wow, Wendy, I think a great understanding for me from what you've mentioned today is that even in the most serious situation that you were put in, and you felt that you did not know how to express yourself, you had so much going on within you. Instead of picking up any sort of tool that could harm you or harm anyone else, you picked up a pen or a pencil and you started writing that down. You started
Yeah.
expressing it. And if I heard that right, you said that that helped you
Yes, it did.
go. So, for our listeners and everyone who's glued to us and listening to us, I think that you must have had that aha moment, that why people really say that journal, why people say write, why people have diaries. So this is a very real life example, that what all that Wendy is capable of today, whatever she's doing, it kind of stems down from the very fact that she started this exercise as streamlining her emotions through writing it down.
Correct.
This is very very interesting, that from here on, that now that you've moved to Australia when you were 21, as you mentioned, you're still carrying all these memories, your experiences, and probably you might have that picture that, oh, we are moving to a different country now, maybe things will be better, brighter, everything's going to be definitely far far better than my life back home. What was it, to begin with, your first few years over here?
Okay, so the reality was that it was better in a day-to-day situation. So, for example, I could go anywhere. But when you've been traumatized by what you've lived through for that long, you don't know that you are until you're in the situation. I remember going into the city with my cousin. My cousin had been living here 5 years before me. And she took me into the city one day, and I said to her, "What carriage do I get into?" And she said to me, "You're not in South Africa anymore. You can get on any carriage. You can go on any train. You can go into any cinema. You can," but, it took a while to actually get that out of the psyche, out of the head. And
It's
then
not easy.
the other side of that was that getting used to freedom. Finally, I'm free and I can go anywhere I want to in the city. It was quite something. We were all, and this is myself and my two sisters and two brothers, we struggled. We, in fact, said to our parents in the first 2 years, probably more than half a dozen times, we want to go back to South Africa. We were unhappy here because we didn't know how to adjust to the life. And I think a lot of people don't realize that when you're a new migrant, it is difficult, especially when you come from civil war and you come from, war-torn places or places where there's extreme challenge. And then you're suddenly in this country and you can kind of go wherever you want and you're not restricted. You don't know how to be with that. I certainly didn't know how to be with that, and neither did my siblings. And we all struggled. So here's my mother. The poor woman is stressed out in South Africa, wondering if her kids are going to come home alive. Then she's in Australia and her kids are crying to go back home and they can't settle emotionally. So my mother was traumatized, worried all the time. I'd say my mother spent a few years, at least 3 years, worried about her very sad children who just wanted to go back home. And this is the thing. This is when sometimes you can be in traumatic situations. You get so used to it that adjusting outside of it becomes a challenge. And that was certainly something. So that was the reality. People always tell you, you go to a new country, it's going to be better. And in the end, it was better. But the first 2 or 3 years wasn't so great because you're trying to emotionally and physically and in your mind adjust to this newfound freedom. And a lot of people don't realize how difficult that can be. So, I have a lot of empathy for people who come from other countries and are new and struggle because I know what that's like. It's an absolute reality. Getting used to a new country, its culture, its ways, and even in my case, just getting used to freedom, was a very strange thing to experience. So it's like you spend all the years longing to leave the country because it's so war-torn, and then you leave the country and you spend the first 2 years longing to go back, because it's familiar.
Wendy, this is a very different I don't know, a very different situation that I have heard of. Yes, I do. Being someone who has left my own country for a very long time and coming to a new place, I think I definitely understand when you say, the process of migrating and settling in a new country is very challenging. But what you're saying is a very deep thought process. I think it's a very deep feeling, emotion that you and your siblings, they have gone through, is that you were longing for freedom, you were longing for so many things, your own rights, and when you actually got it, you had no idea that what you do with that. Because I think it is also connected with the sense of self, that when you're subjected to a certain kind of situation all your life, you forget that you have a different kind of life as well. Like your brain doesn't really process with that.
Correct.
And when you're suddenly in a new form of life, you were like, no, this can't be real, or this is not for me. Maybe I don't deserve it, or this is not how life is always going to be. This is just a matter of time. Everything will be taken away from me. Because I think it's the associations you have. It's the image, that it's a belief that you have been carrying for certain long. So Wendy, I can definitely see that it was a very tough journey, not just physically settling into a new country and getting to know things, people, and how things work, but actually it's about the identity shift, about
Yes.
you yourself. So how did that started happening for you and your family, I would say, from that point around?
So, with time, so I went to university and got to meet people of different cultures. And initially, I was a little bit nervous and afraid. People were very interested in my life. Once they heard I came from South Africa and they heard I had lived through apartheid, I was bombarded at university. People wanted, what was it like? How did you survive? And so there's a couple of things that happened there. One was that I didn't really want to talk a lot about it because it was still a traumatic experience. There were still trauma
Fresh.
memories,
Yeah.
still fresh. So I wasn't that interested in talking that much. But then, so initially when I came, people kind of thought I was aloof. And I probably was because I was very wary, especially of white people. So I was very wary. But as time went by and I made friends and I did Spanish class and I did psychology and I started to integrate and meet more and more people. And I put myself in situations where I went to communities. I belonged to the Spanish community, and then they would have the Latin American dance community and all that. I would go to all these functions that the university was running deliberately, even though I was terribly nervous. I was like, I suppose I went back to the basics of what my father had taught me. You have to put yourself in the difficult situations because you're never going to change it unless you walk through it. So that's what I did, and slowly started to build friendships and started to get more and more comfortable talking about life and realizing that that life wasn't going to come back to haunt me again, that I was in a different country, that it was safe to be here, and that I could integrate with other people. So it was really about constantly putting myself in what I call uncomfortable situations. And I've seen that work across everything in my life. Anytime something's super difficult, I deliberately walk through that fire because I'm like, I'm not going to get past it if I avoid it, right? So then I'm like, go and do it. But that doesn't mean that I wasn't scared. I was absolutely scared. But it's, there's lots of sayings, feel the fear and do it anyway. So that was kind of what I did really on a weekly basis until I started to get more and more comfortable. And then I made a group of friends. I happened to run into an old friend who had gone with me to the University of Cape Town in South Africa. I didn't know that she was migrating to Australia. She didn't know that I was migrating to Australia. We ran into each other on campus one day and we were both stunned to see each other. And so she's been a lifelong friend because she's someone that comes from the environment that I come from. We knew each other's story, and then through her, and then I made other friends through her and her family, and she made other friends through me and my family. And so, you're just expanding your network all the time.
I like the fact that in the new country as well, there was this sense of home through this new friend of yours.
Yes.
And as you mentioned that you were bombarded with some very uncomfortable questions, but you had this mindset of throwing yourself into fire to do things that scared you, because otherwise how would you really go past it? So just let's kind of put this into now the examples that you have really gone through, which is from your early motherhood to kind of building your own story of being a career coach. But just before that, when you graduated, when you started working, what was happening just before that? You started your own company, your own career coaching business. What happened just before that led you to actually take that step?
Okay, so just before that, so obviously once I'm graduated from uni, so then I had that first job and there was a bank robbery and I was held up by gun at gunpoint. So there was trauma there again. And I look at the patterns of my life and I see that there's been a lot of trauma. But what I want to encourage your listeners is that it doesn't matter. You can come through even the most difficult circumstances if you want to, right? And sometimes it takes something and you've got to go get counseling and you've got to go get help. When I was held up in the bank, I had to go through counseling for 18 months because I had nightmares. I constantly would fall asleep and see the double-barrel shotgun to my head. But so there's action that I needed to take. The bank offered the counseling. I took the counseling, and that was the start of lots of things. And it wasn't only the start of the counseling to help me get over being held up. When you go to counseling, it unravels some of the other stuff in your life too. The stuff that you've been carrying for years, like South Africa, coming here, and all of those things. So that was one of the situations just before. And then I was in a relationship. That relationship ended after 9 years, and I was pregnant at the time. My partner had an affair, left. There was a violent ending to that relationship. He got quite violent, and I was left with the mortgage on the house sold at a loss, and so there was massive debt. So I'm about to become a new mother. This happened when I was 4 months pregnant. I'm about to become a new mother, and all I can think of is I have a baby now to take care of. I've got a kid to take care of. And I didn't know how to increase my income. So here's where the segue into the career change and all of this happens, is that I'm like, I need to earn another $20,000 just to be able to pay my debt and be able to take care of my daughter. There again, I put myself in very uncomfortable situations. I started to talk to recruiters and hiring managers. I would just call them up, ask them if I could take them out for a coffee. I would pick their brains, like what's the best way for me to become better at interviewing? What's the best way for me to present myself with a great resume so that I can get a pay rise? Because in my head, it was just $20,000. I need $20,000. It was driving me like a force because of my daughter. And then as I did that for probably 6 to 7 months solid, and then one day there was a job advertised. I didn't have any experience in it, but I had experience in leading people, and it was a project management office role. And I was like, I've got no experience. But when I looked at some of what they said you needed, the soft skills, like the leadership and the working with people and the building the teams, I'm like, I can do that. I can do that. So I took a chance and I used all the knowledge that those recruiters and those hiring people had taught me. I had rewritten my own resume a gazillion times. And I took a chance on the role and I sent in the resume and I landed the interview. And then I'd also, parallel to that, I had practiced with some recruiters and hiring people. It was just a matter of asking, networking and asking for help. That was all it was. And people were generous and they were helping me. You know, many of them knew I was a single mom trying to recreate my life. So they helped. And I ended up landed that job, which increased my income by $50,000. So I overshot my goal. And that told me that I could do it, that all I had to do was have the guts to go through it, to ask for help, to pick people's brains, to implement the knowledge that they taught me, and then have a shot at it. And it was really that changed my whole life, because I landed this great role in corporate. And so, but I also realized I had a system, and also the people around me, the friends, the colleagues, the family members who knew the story and knew that I had hit rock bottom financially with that relationship. And I was now trying to recreate my life. People saw that I went from this income to that income and suddenly landed this really great job. So they came, can you help me? That's how my business started. I
Wow.
started to help colleagues, I started to help family, I started to help friends, and I was working the corporate job. So I actually worked the corporate job for 22, 23 years. And parallel to that, I had the side business of helping other people with their careers. And so it was a very part-time business for about 15 years. And then when I got to the later years of life and my daughter was grown, I decided I wanted to do my own business. And so it became a full-time business. And that's what I do now. But it really was out of desperation that it started. That business started out of me trying to improve my career prospects. And basically, if I'm brutally honest, I needed more money. It was as simple as that. I needed more money.
And that is the reality of many of us, because at the end of the day, if you are the sole earner, breadwinner of your own family, be it any person, a male or a female, or a young family, or maybe single parents, or anyone out there, if you have just started to, create a financial life, a living for yourself, and you are the person responsible for your financials, you will come to know that how important it is to have money just to be able to pay your bills. I've been in that situation, Wendy, and I can totally relate and understand that the desperation, the need of money to just even to survive, it really pushes you to actually go to the length that you are ready to kind of really unleash all the things that you are also not aware that's within you, and you just go for it.
Yeah,
So it's exciting to see that where you still continued with your l- corporate experience and your corporate life. Along with that, you manage your side business for 15 years. That's not easy, having a full-time job and then doing a business on the sides. You really worked round the clock for it, and I completely understand. You had a family to feed and there were so many things going on, but more than that, I can see that you loved your business, the side business at that point in time.
absolutely.
It must have not been like, oh my God, another few extra hours of work for a day. It was like, oh, I want to do that because that's where you are getting all the energy from. You love doing what you're doing. And when you did come out full on, that this is my business now, you have more time at your hand, or maybe you want to invest more time in this. And we have, I think, taken a really amazing journey from your beginning to your South Africa, how strong willed that person that you were. Your mother is an amazing person to have that courage to kind of migrate with the whole family. It's
Yes.
not easy feat. It's not, because
No,
anything could go wrong. I mean, so
absolutely.
I think you had such great attitude towards life. I'm fearful, but I need to do it because there's no other option of living a life. And now coming to this point where you mentioned that you've seen some really tough times, I would say that, and
Yes, I have.
they're not normal. They're not at all normal. So I'm extremely happy that you stand here tall to share this with us and to let everyone, especially the youth out there, to know that there are such difficult, challenging situations that people have really come out through. And it's not that, that only certain people can do this. It is about believing in yourself that you can do it. It is about the mindset, because you tapped into that and you made it happen. That's why it happened for you. And it's not that everyone is able to kind of do that, but to share this story itself, to let us know that if you can really, surpass those challenging times, we can certainly learn something from that. And whatever challenges that we are having in our life, we can also just take one more step and be really, really strong willed, that if we believe that I can really do this, I will take the first step, and then let's see whatever happens, we'll figure it out. So thank you so much, Wendy, for being on my first step ever, taking us through your journey.
Yes.
Now that we have come to the end of this episode, I just want to kind of quickly ask you one last question, that you are this amazing interview and career coach. We know why you are this. We know what you're doing. And we definitely know that you have such great experience, lived experience, that you can
Yes.
actually share through being a coach over here. Is there any top three things that you would like to share with our listeners today as a career coach, as an interview expert, that you do with everyone who comes to you for help?
So the first thing I tell people to do is to gather their achievements. Like, have a document, like whatever job you're working, or even if you're working your part-time job as a student, see where you've made things better, right? Because everybody goes in, wherever you go, there's always something that you do that you make it better. And it could be a process that you do. It could be that you noticed some team members are struggling and you have a way to help uplift them. So I say to people, gather the achievements, because they're going to come in really handy when you have to sell yourself in an interview, or when you have to sell yourself as the right candidate for the job. That's number one tip. Gather them, even if you don't need them, keep them in a memo or in a document, because it makes your resume that much easier to write. The other thing is, get good at networking. A lot of people hate it, but some of the greatest opportunities, some of the best jobs I got, and the ones that paid me the most money happened through my networks. They were what they call the hidden job market. And the hidden job market is all about networking. So a lot of really great, juicy, wonderful jobs don't ever get advertised. They happen through people telling people, through telling people, or recommending people. So get good at networking. And it's a lot easier for the current generation because you've got LinkedIn. Back in my day, we had to go to a meetup. You had to talk to people in person, and you had to try and sell your skills, right? Now you can literally network with anybody online. And LinkedIn makes that super easy. I'm very big on every client I work with. I teach them how to use LinkedIn effectively. So they're building their network all the time. And then the last thing I say to people, a giver. Try to give before you take. Because when you're a giver, if you're helping someone, people always remember that. That's how doors get opened, right? A lot of people, when I was helping people in the beginning, when I first started the coaching, I didn't do it charging people. I would just help them. I got the success. People were struggling around me. I started to help them. But what happened is they started to recommend me everywhere. Right. And so, and the same thing happens in a job. If you're a giver, if you're always wanting to share knowledge, uplift other people keep that in mind, and they always remember that, because sometimes it's so unusual. People tend to want to take all the time. But if you become a giver in life and you share your knowledge and you share your processes and you find a way to make other people grow, whether it's in their career or their personal life, you're always going to have opportunities come your way. I have seen that over and over again. So those are my top three. Gather your achievements, get really good at networking, and be a giver in life.
Love those three amazing tips, and I can see that where it's coming from and why you have stayed in the industry for so long, and why expanded into a business which is doing so well. Because these three are such amazing, amazing actionable steps that once you start doing that, definitely you will get somewhere. And I think there's one very big uh roadblock in everyone's head, and I will also include myself being there some point in time in my life, is that once someone gives us an advice, or maybe tips like this, when you hear a podcast, you read a book in anywhere, Someone gives you an advice, so this is what you could do. We think of the extreme, that how can I be the ace networker? How can I ace this? I could never ace this. But that is a very, very, very extreme thinking and a very big load that you're putting on yourself, that no one is really asking you to be ace person in that category. It's a way of getting better and
That's right.
actually getting to the end point where you want to reach. So I think take off that pressure that you have to be such good networker, or that you have to be so good about doing everything else that Wendy has mentioned today. It's about starting, it is about the direction that she has given us, the clear and the very, very right directions that she has given us. Let's start putting your little steps on that path right
That's right.
now.
Small daily actions, small, the operative word is small. Small daily actions leads to success.
Yes. Be the part of the process of your own process and let the outcome be. That's not something for you to worry. So thank you so much,
Thank you.
Wendy,
Pleasure.
for being on my first step ever. And could you please leave our listeners with a quote or a saying that you really resonate with?
So this is one from Nelson Mandela. Obviously, you can understand he's a hero of mine because he was the ultimate peace activist. And he said, difficulties break some people and make other people. At the end
Wow.
of the day, it is up to you what you're going to be. Are you going to let it break you, or are you going to let it make you?
This is amazing. I am wishing for everyone who's listening to us, including myself, we would like the difficulty to make us and make
Yes.
us into the best of ourselves. So thank you so much, Wendy, for being on my first step ever. And for everyone who would like to learn a bit more about Wendy, I'm gonna leave a little bit about her and the links in the show notes. So do check that out. And as I always say, start believing in yourself and keep believing in yourself. And see you until next time. Thank you so much, Wendy.